The bottom of the first slide is part of John 3:16. Can you say it with me? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So the thought came to me during worship to give a graduation address. We have a row filled. I graduated from high school. I graduated from college. I graduated from UT with a master's. I graduated from UT with a PhD. Been to a lot of graduation ceremonies. I've heard a lot of graduation messages. I never heard this message. I have a task for you, video booth. If you have a pen and pencil, can you write this word down? I'm going to spell it. It's spelled this way: DYSMORPHOCOCCUS space GLOBOSUS. It's pronounced Dysmorphococcus globosus. Can you see if you can find a picture of that on the web? So Acts 2:23, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enfold a portion of what I intended to say this morning, and I want to make it a graduation address. It's quite a milestone. We have some from high school, some from junior college, some two-year college, some from a four-year college. I don't think everybody is here who we desired to honor today who have been a significant part of our congregation, but a number are for a smaller congregation to have a row full of graduates. It's a delight. Having graduated a fair number of times, there are things that I've learned. And I wished I had heard this message when I began, because when I finished high school and began my college work, it was begun with great disappointment, largely on my parents' part, because they had both graduated from a college in Wheaton, Illinois, Wheaton College, and they intended for me to go there. They had terrific plans for my life, and when they discovered that I was not able to go to Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, it was a supreme disappointment to them. I went to Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee, and it was the beginning of a journey that actually started long before I was born. Your journey began. Some of you, all of you, some of you have been trained in the ways of evolution. None of your teachers would have told you this. God had purpose and plan for your life long before you came into being. I'm convinced from the foundation of the world, at some point in time, you personally came into the mind and thought and intentions of God. He planned you. I believe He planned the time that you have come into history. You're not just here because you happen to be born to your parents. I believe you exist in this time in history because God picked you to be here. And you're on a path. You're at a time period when, what am I going to do? My mind was very full of, what am I going to do when I graduated from high school? I didn't get to go where my parents wanted me to go, and I wanted to honor them. So that was delightful to me, to go where they wanted me to go. And I shared a little bit of their disappointment when I was not accepted where they thought I should have been accepted. What I didn't know was that was not a disappointment to God. It was in the household, my father and mother's household. It was a supreme disappointment. Didn't disappoint God because He knew awaiting me was Faye Smith. I didn't know Faye Smith was awaiting me. If I had known that Faye Smith was awaiting me, I would have done everything I could to graduate early so I could get to Bryan earlier. But then she wouldn't have been there, so I had to wait until it was the right time. You understand? I did my undergraduate work. I couldn't have told you that the reason was I needed to get a biology degree and I needed to find my wife. I didn't know that. That's not why I went. I don't encourage you to follow the example that I did. I was so confused as to what I ought to do, what choices. Some of you are very concerned, understandably, about choices. What am I going to do? What's going to open up? I was filled with those things, and being a terrible phlegmatic, we tend to postpone things again and again and again and again and again. So I postponed choosing a major through the first semester of my freshman year, through the second semester of my freshman year, through the first semester of my sophomore year, through the second semester of my sophomore year. At the end of my first semester of my junior year, I had 3 choices left. And I chose which one of them I disliked the least. That's how I launched into a career of biology. Which one I disliked the least. Little did I know that God is fully involved in our lives, is fully involved in developing and preparing us. Even when we mess up, even when we make catastrophic mistakes, it doesn't keep God at all, because there's one factor of God that never changes. That is His love for you. There's nothing that you have done or will do that will change His love for you. There are things that you might do that might cause memories that you carry with you that will hinder you, hurt you, be disappointing to you of your own choices. But when you come to realize there's nothing that you have done or will do that will separate you from the love of God and His care for you and His intentions for you. I believe sometimes we make choices that cause us to veer from what God's intent was when He designed you, planned you at the beginning of from the foundation of the world, whenever each of you came into His thinking. And I believe God's always working on whether it's plan B or C or D or E or what have you, that He can, through you, accomplish the greatest that He can accomplish from your life. You should start now. You can begin now. Some of you have already been doing it. I didn't understand this passage. It was meaningless to me. The passage in Acts chapter 2, please. This is Peter's message on the day of Pentecost. This is a great graduation message. It's one I never heard. To start with this, I don't mean the things I'm saying. I mean this passage. He was speaking about the day of crucifixion and resurrection. This was the day of Pentecost. He was speaking this. So the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus was not that many days in the past. And Peter was speaking through the Holy Spirit, giving explanation of, answering a question on that day. There were people who asked what was going on around them, what it meant. So Peter's message that day was an answer to a question. What does this mean? All these people appearing like they are, speaking in tongues, we understanding them in our own language. Whether they were speaking in all those different languages, we don't know, but they understood them in all of their individual languages. And Peter made this phenomenal declaration, him speaking about Jesus. He had just before that mentioned, you crucified him. Him, speaking of Jesus, being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God. Peter was saying, on that day, when you killed him, there was at work the determined purpose and the foreknowledge of God. I want to say, there is a God, and your life, there is a determined purpose and foreknowledge of God regarding you. And your concern is far less, what am I going to do? What choices do I need to make? Your concern far more is, I want to do your will. What happens if you mess up significantly? Faye and I had someone from the congregation come to our home recently and wanted to speak to both of us. And she wanted to talk about her life and some choices that she had to make. And she said, and before I was 21, I mostly made a mess of my life. Said, I was raised in a home that my mother had been raised in an exceedingly strict home. I don't know what the definition of strict was for her. But she said, my mother had been raised in such a strict home that she made a decision, which is not uncommon, that she was not going to do that. So instead of having a strict home, her mother decided anything goes, everything goes, we'll try everything, we'll do everything. She in essence said to her kids, you can do anything you want. And we'll join you, or you can join us, because we're going to do anything and everything. And so she explained when she was 21, her life was a mess, and she had done everything. She did a great job of not itemizing it, not exalting in all of the bad choices she made. Just said, I was filled with bad choices. I had no joy. I had no peace. Nothing was fulfilling, and it was awful. What does God think about a life like that? I believe the predetermined counsel and foreknowledge of God, I believe God in His foreknowledge knew back before the foundation of the world. I believe He knew every choice you were going to make. He lets you live your lives. I believe He lets you, as He lets all of humanity, He lets us live our lives. He plants in the garden of our life the two trees in the very center. He really does give you choice. And there are real consequences to every choice you make. But does it change His love? Let's say, as this gal, who's now quite a bit older than 21, but let's say this gal who was 21 said, in essence, when I was 21, one day I was so distraught, discouraged, convicted, condemned. I was so much of all of the choices, and everything was empty. She said, I took a blanket, I went outside, took a yellow pad, and I decided I'm going to write down everything that I'm ashamed of, that I've done wrong. I'm just going to write everything. I dialogued with her. Well, why did you do that? Did you get a thought? Did a thought come to you? Write everything down? Why did you do that? Said, I don't know. I was so fed up with the life that I had lived. And I wasn't going contrary to the family I was born in. Everyone was doing it. It was greatly encouraged. I wrote everything down. Said after she wrote everything down, I don't know how many pages or lines, but I wrote down everything that I'd done wrong. It wasn't in church, wasn't a service. She was just sitting outside on a blanket by herself. That was the legacy of her life at that moment. But there's a God who had purpose, who created her. And I think He was waiting for this moment. He was waiting for the moment when she would be ripe. It was a pivot point. You all have reached one of the pivot points that will take place in your life. I didn't know enough when I was where you were to really be thinking, God, this is such a pivot point. But I know far more than the choices that I have to make or what's in front of me is being aligned with you and saying, I really do want to do your will. I may have trouble selecting it. Help me if I make a bad choice. But I really want to do your will. That's what I want to do. I'm confused by the myriad of things that are in front of me. So she's sitting there, told Faye and I, she was sitting there at 21 on a blanket with a yellow pad that she listed everything that she had done wrong. And she heard this thought. I can help you if you let me. I can help you if you will let me. So here she is. On one hand, she has this yellow pad with, she listed everything on there that she said, her words were, that I had done wrong. And in the face of that, did that ruin her life at 21? She'd made many choices that could have easily ended her life, ruined her life, many, many times. And I believe she heard the voice of the Holy Spirit, the Father, speaking through the voice of the Holy Spirit. I can help you if you'll let me. There may come a time when you become very disappointed in choices that you have already made, or choices, perish the thought, that you may make in the years to come. My hopes are that you'll remember there is a God who can help you and wants to. Because way more than you want to make it, He has intentions, predetermined counsel, purpose, coupled with His foreknowledge of you. Way more than you want to do His will, He wants you to do His will. Now, I didn't understand that. I had no grasp that really, with God, though our life is very much up and down, sometimes back, sometimes sinks, sometimes has really high moments, sometimes circles, sometimes unending circles it can seem. I'm not making any progress. I'm going round and round again. That's what it may seem like to us. I believe God, the way He looks at it is, He knows when He planned and designed you. He knew when it was time for you to come into this realm. He knew, given all the biology, what family line you would be born into. That doesn't delay or deter Him from whatever purposes He has for you. I view it as a straight line. That His intention, His planning is a straight line. By chance, did you find Dysmorphococcus globosus? Can you please show it on the screen? Okay, I devoted 5.5 years to that thing. Dysmorphococcus globosus. It's a single-celled algae. So most of you would call it pond scum. It's an appropriate term, but please don't use it around me, because then I think I devoted 5.5 years to pond scum. Actually, God was that's remarkable, guys. You're to be commended. It has two flagella, two little appendages that stick out. I don't know if you can see them in that. Okay. It has an encasement. There's what's called a lorica. Welcome to biology. This is graduate school level. It's a lorica. It's like a plexiglass globosus, a global shell encasement that this single-celled algae, it's not an animal, it's a plant, but it has motion. It has two propellers, two flagella, and it moves those flagella through the water. I know. What did you learn in church today? Well, Martha, I learned about flagella. Well, do you have any? No, but he thinks they're important. So, I was assigned a research project for my PhD. I had no idea that God was intimately involved in this research project. To my knowledge, God had nothing to do with this research project. The point is there is a God who has predetermined counsel, predetermined plan for you. And your best choice is to seek it as early as you can and live your life pursuing his purpose and his plan. That's your best choice. He knows what he has intended for your lifetime. I didn't know that. So when I was doing graduate work, my major professor said, what I want you to do your research project on is Dysmorphococcus globosus, bold and star. Her major professor was Dr. Harold C. Bold, and he discovered this thing, found it, and she wanted someone to do an electron microscope study of the development of that encasement. That encasement that has two little holes or pores through which that little single-celled critter sticks its two flagella, so to speak, and swims through the water. And she said, I want you to study its life cycle, what it goes through, how it's developed, and I want you to do it on the ultrastructural level, meaning I want you to learn the electron microscope, and I want you to devote 5.5 years to studying this thing. Little did I know that God was saying to me, I have intimate purpose in that. You may think you're just wasting your time. You may have jobs that you may think at the moment, I'm just wasting my time. But all you have to do is keep saying yes to his purposes. Do I think you will understand his purposes? No. Usually not at the time that you have to make choices that I'll go in this direction. I really think you're leading me this way. As best I know, you're leading me in this way. God has predetermined what his purpose is for your life. He wants you to find it and follow it and experience it way more than you do. Way more. So I launched out to learn the electron microscope. I launched out all the technology and started studying this little critter called Dysmorphococcus globosus. Now in the end, everything biological is classified. It has a name. It's a family, a genus, a species. You might be, if you've taken biology recently, there's a phylum, there's an order, there's a kingdom. You at least maybe one time you studied those words for a test. Everything is classified with an elaborate classification scheme. And this little critter was classified among those who have a very solid, like big deal, I understand you're saying big deal, a solid lorica. And I found through the course of the study in electron microscope that actually wasn't true, that it actually had little tiny pores all over it, so the world is a better place because of it. No, but I learned something that helped me understand New Covenant Fellowship. Though at that time, New Covenant Fellowship wasn't on my mind. What was on my mind is finishing the PhD, and what was I going to do, because I couldn't go back to the college that I used to come from, and very concerned. I don't know what to do. All I know to do is to finish what I was convinced God led me into, but I have no idea where it's going to go and how is my family. And then I started a house, and the house was not finished. I found a Bible verse that said it was a curse to build a house and not finish it, and I had 2 job offers, and I felt like I can't take those job offers because my house won't be finished, and I don't want the end of my life to be a declaration his life was cursed. That to me was an anathema. To live my whole life for God, and the net result of it is his life was a curse. He built a house, and he wasn't able to live in it. So I turned down 2 jobs. One of them was, if there was a dream job, it was the dream job. It had everything, including a brand new electron microscope, at a full gospel school. And they were just looking for someone to come who understood the electron microscope and was willing to do research. And it was a charismatic school. I couldn't have picked a better choice, but I had a house that wasn't finished. And I had ringing in my ears something I write almost on every graduation card: never for the sake of peace and quiet, forsake your convictions. And I became convinced, based on a Bible verse in Deuteronomy, that it was a curse to build a house and not live in it. So I turned those jobs down, not having any idea, where am I going to go? I chose the route of biblical conviction. But underneath it, there was not the ongoing underlying realization that there is a predetermined plan that God has for my life. Calvary was predetermined before the foundation of the world. If Calvary was predetermined, then the whole line, the whole Jewish nation, all of that was predetermined before the foundation of the world, because Jesus was crucified. If he was crucified before the foundation of the world, the whole Roman Empire was in the mind and understanding of God. Everything that preceded Jesus and how all that interrelated was in the mind and heart of God. Well, you see God really as God. Yes, but it's taken years and years and years. So in the course of studying that little creature that was up there, in the course of studying it, I came to realize it actually has little holes. Big deal. It was classified wrong. That was a big deal because it was my major professor's major professor who classified it. So I was proving her major professor wrong. So I got no accolades. Nobody jumped up and down in the lab and said, "That's wonderful, the news that you have found out." They didn't want me to find out that news. But it was okay. I've wondered for years, why was that the net result of something that almost nobody cares about, this little single-celled pond scum, that actually how it had been identified and named and placed was wrong? I spent 5.5 years to do that. I also spent 5.5 years being a husband and a father, building a house, starting out. There were many things that were accomplished, but that was the net result of all that doctoral work. And then I did postdoc work for 2 years, and because I hadn't published my dissertation, I had additional opportunity to do additional studies and use radiological studies and prove even further using radioisotope uptake that little critter that nobody cares about, that little critter actually does have holes, and proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. So the net result of all that study, not knowing that God was going to say to me, and it would take me 34 years to realize it, there's another misconception or misunderstanding or lack of understanding that's not going to be understood properly. But if you understand it properly, it's going to change your life. So that little one-celled thing that has essentially no meaning, and the research that I did that essentially, who cares, set inside of me the realization, if you look carefully enough, if you have the right instruments, if you have the right technology, you can see things at levels that are way beyond ability to see just with the human eyes. So I learned to use technology that enabled me to see at incredibly small dimensions. You will be developing eyes. Whether you go on for further education, whether this is just the beginning of your journey, whether it's the end of your educational journey, I don't know. It'll be different for each of you. God intends for you to develop eyes that ultimately will be focused on, okay, God, what are you doing now? I'm pretty sure I'm here because you've been guiding me here. What are you accomplishing right now? My hopes are that you'll develop those eyes. There is a predetermined counsel and foreknowledge. It is my opinion that all of those things existed prior to Calvary because he was slain from the foundation of the world. I believe that's never stopped. When I look at my life and look at the complexity of my life, which is no different than your life, and see all the divine appointments and all the interactions of all, I've come with the conclusion nothing is a surprise to God. He's known all about it. He's been arranging contacts, people, opportunities. He's been arranging them. They're all good. His intentions are all good, whether I understand them as good or not. The predetermined counsel of God. if there's a single verse that I would that was established in you, God, there's predetermined counsel and foreknowledge on your part. I can trust you. I can trust you. How does this relate to New Covenant? We started on November the 1st, 1981. It was 15 years later that I heard there was a prophecy by Bob Jones who said that when stamps, postage stamps in the United States go to 20 cents, and was told that that was in October of 1981, that he would be issuing the very first of the induction notices to people to the end-time army of God. I thought, well, that was interesting because we were started as a congregation maybe a couple of weeks after that when postage stamps, when it was, that's just what was said. It was just last year, so 34 years, nearly 34 years after we began, and I started studying that, I discovered that's not true. Postage stamps, you could purchase them in October of 1981, but the requirement to use stamps didn't start, a 20-cent stamp didn't start till November the 1st of 1981, different than what was published. And realized we actually started as a congregation on the first day. This reminds me of my PhD years. I discovered something that was meaningless, it seemed, but God was developing in me, as He will develop in you, an understanding of something that it may take 34 years before it makes any sense. Oh, God, I now see there's a straight line. It's 34 years long. There's a straight line of your working in my life. So there was a way of thinking, well, it seemed understandable, it seemed right, but actually there is present there something that because they didn't have the technology to look it up, it was actually different than it was widely believed. And came to realize God picked the time period for we as a congregation to begin, because there was something He wanted us to understand, that it was in His mind that we as a congregation would play a role in the end-time army of God. And He did it in such a way that on the very first day, through this prophet, induction invitations were handed out. We began. And we could have begun months before that. The point being, the tool that enabled me to see there was a misunderstanding. So that misunderstanding, when it was corrected, using the tool of the internet and just looking it up, realized, oh, it wasn't October. It actually was November the 1st, 1981, that stamps, you were required to use a 20-cent stamp. What all difference does that make? It's a huge difference if you're convinced God brought you into existence on a very specific day for the beginning of a very specific purpose, and you're called to lead. It makes a huge difference what you are convinced God has done. That's where your strength is. What you're convinced God has done, God is doing. His predetermined counsel, His foreknowledge. He's not trying to hide it from you. But we live by faith. So there are times, probably every time, He will make it such, it's His delight to hide things. It is our honor to search things out because we are to live a life of faith. So there are things God has for you, every intention. He wants you to seek Him. He that comes to God must believe that He is, and He's the rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So we are honoring your graduation. It is significant. And I'm banking on that as you look back in the years to come, you will see things that God was setting in motion through your life, through your choices, especially as you chose what you were convinced, I think this is what he wants me to do. I've gone through life, I've made some terribly wrong choices when I thought I was making the right choice. And I realized with time, God is the one who honors our hearts, not our thinking, our hearts. My heart was, I really do want to do your will. My thinking was, I made a wrong choice with my thinking. I have found with time, that doesn't affect his love for me at all. And I have found in some major decisions I was going to make, had initiated, my thinking was wrong. My heart was, I really do want to do your will. That he redirected my thinking, and I found myself having another opportunity to make the choice that he wanted me to make. So on this day in which it's a delight to us to honor you and your graduation, what I've learned is that God has predetermined counsel, purpose. He has foreknowledge. And the significant steps of our life are actually all connected together. I've often thought, before I discovered the start date and its significance for this congregation, why in the world did I spend 5.5 years studying a little single-celled pond scum? Why did I do that? I now realize that God wanted to set in my heart that he would enable me to discover something that actually was in error. At first, he was just setting that into my heart. Because a time would come, in one of the most important things of my whole lifetime, he wanted me to come to understand there actually was a minor error, but if you understand and able to make the correction of a minor error, you will have a pair of eyes to look at something that will totally change how you look at it. It took 34 years. So I don't know how each of your stories is going to go. I do know there's a lot of concern right now, as there was for me. What am I going to do? How am I going to spend the rest of your life? My testimony is God knows, and he is directly involved in discipling, training, guiding you. And you will go through time periods that you don't have a clue. How does this relate to anything? And God is accomplishing his predetermined counsel and his foreknowledge. And nothing, as that 21-year-old gal, she said, when I heard that thought, I can help you if you'll let me. She said that she said to the Lord, she understood it was God speaking to her. She didn't hear an audible voice. It was just a very clear thought. Yes, I want your help. I want your help. This yellow pad is the mess. I want your help. She said her life totally changed instantly. That was her story. I suddenly loved the Bible. I suddenly read the Bible. Suddenly my whole family thought I had become the weirdo of weirdos. Something is wrong with so-and-so. I even had to move out of the house for a while because I love the Bible. I carried the Bible. She was under such ridicule. In order to stabilize her new faith, she moved out for a while to become established. When she told us that story, and it was like, here it was, another proof. Here's a lifetime filled with every kind of bad, wrong you could choose. And in the face of that list, God chose that moment to say to her, I can help you if you'll let me. He can help you. Whether you have a list of all the things wrong, or whether you have a list of all the options in front of you, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. Whether your list, there's nothing on it because you don't have a clue. What am I going to do? I don't care what your case is. God can help you. Because He's already invested phenomenally in you and His purposes for your life.